All right, let's dive in. Today we're taking a deep dive into a true classic, Voltaire's Candide.
Candide. Now that's a story that'll take you on a wild ride.
It's satire at its finest, tackling some really big ideas, especially philosophical optimism, and with a healthy dose of dark humor too, by the way.
Oh yeah, Voltaire definitely doesn't shy away from the dark stuff.
So for this deep dive, we'll be using the Wikipedia article on Candide to guide us.
Sounds good. I'm curious to see what we uncover.
I think you'll be surprised by some of the historical connections. I mean, this story, it's full of them. But before we get too deep into that, let me ask you something. Have you ever heard that phrase, the best of all possible worlds?
Yeah, it does sound a little bit, well, maybe a bit naive these days.
Yeah, like something you might find on one of those motivational posters.
Right. But that's exactly the kind of thinking Voltaire was taking aim at. You see, that phrase is closely tied to the philosopher Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz.
Ah, Leibniz. He was the one who argued that God, being perfect, must have created, well, the best possible world.
Right. Exactly. And Candide is basically structured around this journey of the main character, who's also named Candide, who starts out completely believing in this best of all possible worlds idea.
Thanks to his ever-optimistic tutor, Pangloss.
Oh, Pangloss! He's the poster child for naive optimism, isn't he?
Oh, absolutely. Basically, a walking, talking caricature of Leibniz himself. And through Pangloss, Voltaire really, I guess you could say, satirizes that whole idea that everything happens for a reason, even the most awful things.
And believe me, Candide goes through a lot of awful things.
Right. So maybe we should get into the plot a little bit here. What kind of misfortunes does Candide actually have to face to shake this worldview?
Well, it all starts pretty innocently. I mean, relatively speaking. Candide gets kicked out of his pretty idyllic home for a simple kiss.
Exiled for a kiss. Talk about an overreaction.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. But that's just the very beginning. From there, it really spirals. He's forced into the army, witnesses that terrible Lisbon earthquake, gets shipwrecked, robbed, beaten, you name it. Voltaire throws just about every imaginable hardship at this poor guy.
And through it all, Pangloss is there with his, let's just say, his unique way of explaining things away. You mentioned something earlier about noses and spectacles. What was that all about?
Oh, right. That's one of my favorite examples. Pangloss actually argues that noses were created specifically so we could wear glasses.
Wait, really?
Yeah, it's this totally out there idea. Every negative has a built-in positive, according to him. But, Voltaire is using this to show just how ridiculous it is to try and find a silver lining in every single tragedy.
Trying to force a square peg into a round hole, the logic just doesn't work.
Exactly. And Voltaire does this over and over again with Pangloss's explanations, highlighting how absurd it is to rationalize suffering on such a huge scale.
So I have to ask, is there anything that finally makes Candide start to question Pangloss? Or is he a true believer through and through?
Well, Candide does have his moments of doubt, especially, when he's confronted with the just massive scale of human suffering. But then, just when you think he's about to break free, Pangloss swoops in with another one of his ridiculous explanations. And just like that, Candide's pulled right back into that optimistic worldview.
It's almost heartbreaking, isn't it? I mean, on the one hand, you have this innocent guy, just trying to make sense of the world. And then on the other hand, there's Pangloss spouting all this, well, nonsense, really.
And that's what makes Voltaire's satire so brilliant. He manages to make you laugh even when you're cringing at the awful things Candide goes through. It's a delicate balance.
It's funny you should mention that tragic comic aspect, I mean, because, one of the things that makes Candide so powerful is that blend of humor with real historical tragedies. Oh, absolutely. I mean, you can't talk about Candide without talking about the Lisbon earthquake, right? That wasn't just some made-up event for the story. It was a real catastrophe that really devastated Europe.
Exactly. We're talking 1755, massive earthquake hits Lisbon, followed by a tsunami, fires. I mean, tens of thousands of people died. The city was just left in ruins.
It's hard to even imagine.
It really is. And, this event, it had a huge impact on European thought, especially at the time. People were really questioning the idea of a benevolent God. I mean, how could a loving God allow such suffering,
Right. So, in a way, Voltaire is using this real-world tragedy to make a philosophical point.
Exactly. He's showing that even when faced with unimaginable suffering, people like Pangloss will just cling even tighter to their optimistic worldview, no matter how crazy their explanations get.
Speaking of historical events, I mean, Voltaire didn't just stop at the Lisbon earthquake. He also brings in the 7 Years' War, which was, well, it was going on all over Europe and even in other parts of the world during that time, right?
Oh, the Seven Years' War is absolutely crucial to understanding Candide. I mean, this was a global conflict with devastating consequences. And Voltaire uses it to really highlight the absurdity of war, the brutality, how easily human life is just, I don't know, sacrificed for political gain.
Right. It reminds us that Candide's journey isn't just some, I don't know, some abstract philosophical exercise. I mean, it's grounded in the very real violence and upheaval of the 18th century.
Absolutely. And, there's even a specific incident that Voltaire satirizes, the execution of Admiral John Byng.
Admiral Byng.
Yeah, he was a British admiral who was court-martialed and executed for failing to prevent the French from capturing Minorca during the war.
Wow. So Voltaire's using this real event to basically make a point about the arbitrariness of justice, or maybe even just the cruelty of those in power.
Both, really. Remember that line, "In this country, it is good to kill an admiral from time to time in order to encourage the others." I mean, talk about chilling. It's a pretty scathing indictment of how authority can be used to silence dissent, even if it means sacrificing innocent lives.
It's incredible how Voltaire just seamlessly weaves all these historical threads into the story and, without ever bogging it down.
He was a master of that. And, it's through these historical connections that we really start to see the bigger picture of Voltaire's satire. It's not just about poking fun at optimism. It's about critiquing those very systems of power that perpetuate suffering and injustice.
Okay, so we've talked about the misfortunes, the historical events, the whole Pangloss and optimism thing. But, I mean, Candide can't just keep running from hardship forever. Eventually, he has to grapple with the big question, right? Like, how do you actually live in a world that's so clearly not perfect?
Exactly. And that's where we get to the famous ending of Candide, with that phrase that has just, I don't know, it's resonated with readers for centuries. We must cultivate our garden.
Such a simple statement, but there's so much packed into it.
Right.
What do you think Voltaire's really trying to say there? Is it just about, retreating from the world, giving up?
It could be. I mean, some scholars see it as this call to withdraw from all the chaos and focus on creating your own little paradise, a place where you can, control your environment, find some peace.
So creating a bubble of happiness amidst all the turmoil.
Exactly. But, there are other ways to interpret it, too. Some people see it as a much more active form of engagement with the world.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, think about it. Cultivating your garden could be a metaphor for, I don't know, focusing on your work, on using your skills and talents to actually make a difference, a tangible difference,
Yeah. So not necessarily withdrawing from society, but finding a way to contribute something meaningful, even if it's in your own little corner of the world.
Right. And there's another layer to this garden metaphor. It's connected to Voltaire himself, actually. Did you know he was a passionate gardener in real life?
Really?
Yeah, so maybe he's drawing this parallel between the literal act of gardening and the figurative act of cultivating a meaningful life.
Exactly. I mean, gardening takes patience, dedication, and a willingness to work with nature.
Yeah.
Right? And Voltaire could be suggesting that those same qualities are essential for navigating the complexities of just being human.
It's pretty amazing how that one phrase, cultivate your garden, can have so many different meanings: a personal haven, meaningful work, even just reflecting Voltaire's love of gardening.
Yeah, it's pretty layered.
And, it clearly struck a chord with people. I mean, Candide is still relevant, even all these centuries later. It's had a real lasting impact, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Candide has been adapted and reinterpreted in so many different ways over the years. It's like Voltaire planted a seed, and that seed just keeps sprouting up in all these unexpected forms.
In his garden, right? Yeah, exactly. But, I mean, for real, there are so many examples. Have you ever heard of Leonard Bernstein's operetta Candide?
I can't say that I have.
Oh, it's fantastic. It premiered on Broadway back in the 50s, and it takes the satire to a whole new level. I mean, music, lyrics, the whole works.
Wow, I'd love to see how they set Pangloss's, his outlandish pronouncements to music.
Oh, it's brilliant. You'd be surprised. Bernstein really captures the wit and the social commentary of the original, but then he adds this whole other layer of musical musical exuberance. It's become a classic in its own right.
I bet. It really shows you how timeless Voltaire's story is, how it can be translated into different mediums and still resonate.
Oh, for sure. And it's not just opera. There's this 20th century novel, Candido, by Leonardo Sciascia. It's a reimagining of the story set in Sicily.
Oh, wow.
It's a little more subtle, but it's still grappling with the same theme, innocence, experience, that whole search for meaning in a really complex world.
So Voltaire's ideas kind of took root in a whole different time and place.
Exactly. And then there's Candy, that novel by Terry Southern and Mason Hoffenberg.
I'm not familiar with that one either.
It's a much more, how should I put this? Let's just say it's a more uninhibited take on Candide. Set in the 60s, explores sexual liberation, social upheaval, all through a female protagonist.
Wow. From opera to novels to a 60s counterculture spin, Candide's influence is pretty far-reaching.
It really is. And I think it all comes back to something fundamental about Candide's message. It's not tied to any one specific time or place. It's about being human. Our search for meaning, our struggles with good and evil, our attempts to just navigate a world that often feels, absurd and chaotic.
And those are questions we're still asking today, aren't we? Maybe that's why people keep coming back to it.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I'd argue that Voltaire's satire might be even more relevant now than ever. I mean, think about it. We're living in a world of information overload, political polarization, those social media echo chambers. It's easy to feel like we're just, caught in a whirlwind of absurdity, right?
Yeah, no kidding.
So how would Voltaire's wit apply to our modern world? Right. What would he be satirizing? Well, I think he'd have a field day.
Oh, I can only imagine.
The 24-hour news cycle, the obsession with celebrity culture, everyone chasing wealth and status, all ripe for satire, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. And what about the way we kind of filter reality through social media these days, creating our own little bubbles of the best of all possible worlds online?
Exactly. And then, of course, there's the rise of misinformation and the erosion of trust in institutions. I mean, Voltaire was a fierce critic of authority. I think you'd have a lot to say about the challenges we're facing today. A lot to say.
It's like Candide is a message from the past, a warning, reminding us to be critical, to question those in power, to be wary of easy answers.
Right, and to remember that laughter, even in the face of, absurdity, can be a powerful tool for resistance, for change even. Just like Voltaire used satire to expose the hypocrisy of his time, maybe we can use humor to challenge the injustices of our own time.
So where does that leave us? How do we cultivate our gardens in the 21st century?
That's the question, isn't it? I think it's about finding that balance. The world can be a tough place. It can feel absurd for sure. But, it's also full of beauty, connection, the potential for growth. Maybe cultivating our garden today means nurturing those things, our relationships, our creativity, our own little pockets of sanity and joy, I guess you could say.
Finding meaning and purpose, even in the middle of all the chaos.
Yeah.
And doing it without falling into naive optimism or just giving up altogether.
Exactly. And maybe, just maybe, if we can hold on to a little bit of that Voltairean wit, a little bit of that Candide-like resilience, maybe we can make our corner of the world a bit brighter. Who knows?
I like that. Well, on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive into Candide. We've covered a lot. From Pangloss's unique brand of optimism to the real historical events that shape the story to the lasting impact of this satirical masterpiece.
If you're interested in exploring more, really digging into the text, I highly recommend picking up a copy of Candide yourself. It's a quick read, but it's full of layers. You'll be thinking about it long after you finish the last page.
I think I might just do that. And hey, who knows? Maybe it'll inspire you to cultivate your own metaphorical garden, whatever that might look like for you.
That's the idea.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. This time we're tackling a topic that's both captivating and a little bit scary: wildfires.
Yeah.
We've got a Wikipedia article all queued up, and our mission today is to really get to the bottom of not just what wildfires are,
right,
but how they work.
Yeah.
How they impact us and the planet, and why this should matter to you, even if you don't live anywhere near a forest.
It really is fascinating, isn't it? Wildfires, I mean, there's so much more than just destruction. They have this long intertwined history with the planet and its ecosystems, so much more.
Okay, so let's start with the basics then.
Sure.
What exactly a wildfire?
Yeah.
I mean, I noticed in the article that they're called different things around the world, like bushfires in Australia and Corvold fires in Africa.
Yeah, the names might change, but the core concept is the same. A wildfire is essentially an unplanned, uncontrolled fire that rips through vegetation.
Right.
Forests, grasslands, you name it. And it's not just a bonfire. It's a force of nature, with a mind of its own.
And speaking of minds of their own, here's something I found surprising. Like, the article actually says that some ecosystems actually need these fires to survive.
Right.
Which seems kind of counterintuitive at first.
It does, doesn't it? But think about it. Imagine a lodgepole pine forest, for example.
Okay.
Those pine cones, they're often sealed shut with resin, you see.
Yeah.
And it takes the intense heat of a wildfire to melt that resin and then release those seeds inside.
Huh.
It's a fiery rebirth,
No, the fire actually helps the trees reproduce.
That's right.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. Okay, so we know some ecosystems benefit, but how do these things even start?
Well, it really comes down to the fire triangle. It's heat, oxygen, and fuel.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've heard of that.
So you've got plenty of oxygen in the air, obviously.
Right.
The fuel is that dry vegetation. And then all you need is a spark. Lightning, a carelessly tossed cigarette, even just the sun's rays can focus through broken glass. And boom, ignition.
And I'm guessing some places are just naturally more prone to wildfires than others.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm thinking like drier climates with lots of vegetation.
Exactly. Think about places like California or Australia.
Mm-hmm.
They're practically primed for wildfires, because of the dry conditions, the abundant fuel.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's like this perfect storm of ingredients just waiting for a spark.
That's right.
Now, when we think of a wildfire, we usually picture like this giant wall of flames, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the article talks about different types of wildfires.
Yeah.
Like ground fires, surface fires, crown fires, and
It's not just one kind of fire.
Right.
It's a whole fiery family,
Okay.
Ground fires, they're the sneaky ones.
Okay.
Smoldering underground,
Uh-huh.
eating away at those roots and the buried organic matter.
Hmm.
They can burn for weeks, even months, releasing all this smoke and heat, but very few visible flames.
So like an invisible fire monster.
Pretty much.
And then there's surface fires.
Right, and those are more of what we typically picture,
Right.
burning through the grasses and shrubs. They can move quickly or slowly, depending on the wind and terrain.
And then you got the crown fires, which are the ones we see in the news footage, right?
Oh, yeah.
The really dramatic ones.
Those are the heavy artillery.
Okay.
Climbing up from the surface into the treetops, creating just this massive inferno.
Right.
They can engulf entire forests, Think hundreds of feet high, a wall of flames.
Wow. The article mentions something called ladder fuels, which sounds ominous.
Yeah, they are. Imagine small trees, down logs, and vines acting like rungs on a ladder,
Okay.
you see? And that's how these surface fires climb up into the canopy.
Ah, okay.
So a relatively tame surface fire can transform into a raging crown fire just like that.
So it's literally climbing its way to greater intensity.
Exactly.
And speaking of intensity, the article talks about how fast these fires can spread.
Yeah.
It uses this term, forward rate of spread, which sounds pretty technical.
It basically describes how quickly the fire's leading edge is moving across the landscape.
Okay.
Picture this, in grasslands, a wildfire can move as fast as a car on a highway, up to 14 miles per hour.
Whoa. I would not want to be in a foot race with that.
No. And it's not just a straight line of fire, right?
Well, not at all.
The article describes different ways that a wildfire can spread.
It's more like a multi-pronged attack.
Okay.
The fire can spread laterally along its sides. That's called flanking.
Mm-hmm.
And it can also creep backward against the wind, kind of like it's retreating. That's called backing. But the scariest way it spreads is through what we call spotting.
Spotting. What's that?
So imagine this. Embers, little chunks of burning material, get caught by the wind
Okay.
and carried ahead of the main fire, sometimes for miles.
Right. These embers, they land on dry vegetation and start new fires, spot fires, ahead of the main front.
Wow.
It's like the fire's leaping forward, almost teleporting itself.
The article says embers can travel up to 12 miles.
Yeah.
That's crazy. So it's not just the speed of the fire, it's the unpredictability, too.
Absolutely.
And it's not just time of year either, it turns out. Even the time of day makes a difference.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Wildfires have this kind of daily rhythm, you know?
Okay.
They intensify during the day because of lower humidity, higher temperatures, those shifting wind patterns we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
The heat dries out the vegetation, making it even more flammable. And the wind, well, it just fans the flames and pushes them forward.
So it's like the wildfire's energy level surges during the day.
Yeah, something like that.
No wonder wildfire suppression efforts usually start early in the morning, though.
Right. In the U.S., they typically begin around 10 a.m. to try and get ahead of that predictable increase in intensity.
So far, we've been talking about, like, the natural factors that influence these wildfires. But there's a big one we haven't addressed yet. Climate change.
Yeah, that's right. It's a critical piece of the puzzle. We know climate change is creating conditions that make wildfires more likely. Warmer temperatures, prolonged droughts, earlier snowmelts. All of these things dry out the vegetation, turning it into prime wildfire fuel.
Now, the article mentions that the total area burned by wildfires, like globally, has actually decreased in recent years.
Right.
But there's a catch to that, isn't there?
There is, yeah.
It's not, like, as simple as it sounds.
No, it's not as rosy as it sounds. This decrease is mainly because we've been converting forests and savannas into farmland.
Oh, I see.
Fewer trees equals fewer wildfires.
Right.
But in places where the vegetation is abundant, like the forests in the western U.S., the wildfires are burning hotter and more intensely because of climate change.
So it's not that there are fewer wildfires. It's that the landscape is changing in a way that makes some areas less likely to burn.
Yeah, exactly.
But the areas that are burning are doing so with a vengeance.
That's right.
And these fires have a massive impact on the atmosphere, too. The article describes these, like, enormous updrafts that can launch wildfire smoke into the stratosphere.
It's mind-blowing, isn't it? We're talking plumes of smoke reaching heights of 30,000 feet or more, traveling thousands of miles, impacting weather patterns and air quality far from the fire itself.
So even if you don't live anywhere near a wildfire, you could still be breathing in the smoke from one halfway across the world.
That's right. And that smoke isn't just annoying, it's a serious health hazard. It's full of fine particles that can penetrate deep into your lungs, triggering all kinds of respiratory problems and even heart issues. It's a reminder that even if you feel removed from wildfires, their impact can be felt far and wide.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
That's definitely sobering. But earlier you mentioned something that almost seems paradoxical. You said some ecosystems actually benefit from wildfires.
Right.
Can you kind of unpack that a little more?
It's a fascinating example of nature's complexity. Some ecosystems, especially in North America, evolved with fire.
Okay.
They've adapted to these periodic blazes, making them a necessary part of their life cycle.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around how something so destructive can be beneficial. How does that work?
Well, take the jack pine, for example.
Okay.
Its cones are coated in this thick resin that only melts at extremely high temperatures. A wildfire comes along, melts the resin, and boom, the seeds are released, ready to sprout in the newly cleared, nutrient-rich soil.
Huh.
It's like nature's way of hitting the reset button.
So it's like the fire creates the perfect conditions for these trees to regenerate.
Exactly.
That's pretty amazing.
It is. And it's not just plants that benefit.
Ah.
Certain woodpeckers, for example, they rely on the dead trees left behind by fires for nesting and foraging.
Oh, wow.
Fire creates this mosaic of habitats, supporting a greater diversity of life.
It's a delicate balance, though, right?
Yeah.
Right. Like, too much fire or fires that burn too hot, they can actually harm ecosystems instead of helping them.
Absolutely. Too much of a good thing can be a bad thing. That's especially true with invasive species, which can thrive after a fire and make ecosystems more vulnerable to future blazes.
So wildfires can be both destructive and beneficial, depending on the ecosystem
Right?
and the severity of the fire. But we can't forget about the impact on us humans. Right?
That's right. We often focus on the immediate damage, the homes and businesses lost.
Yeah.
And while that's devastating, it's important to remember the less obvious impacts, too.
What else should we be thinking about?
Well, we've talked about the health risks of wildfire smoke.
Right.
But did you know that wildfires can also release toxic chemicals that contaminate water supplies, making the water unsafe to drink?
Oh, wow.
And then there's the psychological impact. The trauma of losing everything, the constant fear of living in these fire-prone areas.
Right.
These things really take a toll on people's mental and emotional well-being.
So it's not just about physical safety. It's about mental and emotional well-being, too.
Exactly.
And even after a fire's put out, the danger's not necessarily over, is it?
No, it's not. That brings us to those often overlooked post-fire risks. Even after those flames are gone, the ground can be unstable,
Right.
increasing the risk of landslides, especially with heavy rain.
Yeah, and there's also that danger of debris flows, those mudslides
Yeah.
filled with ash and debris.
Exactly.
They can be incredibly destructive.
They can sweep away everything in their path.
That's terrifying.
And it's not just about what happens during the fire, it's about what happens after the fire, too. We'll dive into those post-fire risks in more detail in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, well, stay tuned, everyone. We'll be back in just a minute.
All right, welcome back to our deep dive into the world of wildfires.
Last time we left off talking about those hidden dangers that linger even after the flames are out. Things like landslides and debris flows. But the article mentions another post-fire risk that's even more insidious: contaminated water systems.
Yeah, it's a danger that often flies under the radar, but it can have some serious consequences for public health.
Oh, wow.
You see, when wildfires rage, they release all sorts of nasty chemicals and pollutants that can seep into water sources,
Right.
contaminating both the water on the surface and the groundwater below.
So even if a community's water infrastructure, survives the fire itself, the water running through those pipes could be unsafe to drink.
Exactly. And what's particularly worrisome is that this contamination isn't always immediately obvious.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it can take time for those pollutants to show up in tests, and by then, people might have already been exposed.
That's scary. The article specifically mentions benzene contamination,
Right.
and that sounds pretty serious.
Benzene is a known carcinogen, so even low levels of exposure can have long-term health consequences.
Wow.
And it's especially insidious because it can actually permeate certain types of plastic pipes.
Oh, really?
Yeah, meaning it can linger in those water systems for a long time.
So even if a community, flushes out its water system after a fire, there's no guarantee that all the benzene is gone.
It's a real challenge.
Wow.
Sometimes they have to replace entire sections of water pipes to completely eradicate the contamination.
That seems like a huge undertaking.
It is. This is why it's so crucial for communities to have those robust post-fire water testing protocols in place. They need to be proactive, not reactive.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
So we've talked about the dangers of wildfires.
Right.
But how do we fight these behemoths? What does wildfire suppression actually look like?
It's a multi-pronged approach.
Okay.
Kind of like a chess game, against a very unpredictable opponent.
Right.
It involves a combination of tactics, from dropping water and fire retardant from aircraft to establishing fire breaks on the ground.
Yeah, those images of planes and helicopters, swooping low over wildfires, they're pretty iconic.
Yeah, they are, aren't they?
It's like something out of an action movie.
They are pretty dramatic, but they're also incredibly effective.
Really?
They buy time for ground crews to create those fire breaks and contain the blaze.
Speaking of fire breaks, can you explain exactly what those are?
Sure, imagine you're trying to stop this giant hungry monster,
Right.
You need to create a barrier it can't cross.
Okay.
That's essentially what a fire break is.
Okay.
It's a gap in the landscape with no fuel for the fire to burn.
Right.
Firefighters create them by clearing vegetation, digging trenches, or even using controlled burns to remove fuel ahead of the main fire.
So it's like building a wall that the fire can't jump over.
Ideally,
Uh-huh.
yes.
Okay.
But, as we talked about earlier, those pesky embers can travel for miles, starting new fires beyond the fire break. It's
Yeah.
a constant battle.
It sounds like an incredibly dangerous and demanding job.
It is.
Those wildland firefighters are truly heroes,
Yeah,
putting their lives on the line to protect our communities and our forests.
absolutely. They face intense heat, blinding smoke, and the constant threat of that fire changing direction or erupting unexpectedly.
Earlier we mentioned the Man Gulch Fire, which claimed the lives of 13 smoke jumpers back in 1949.
Right.
It's just a stark reminder of the dangers inherent in fighting wildfires.
Yeah, it was a tragedy that really shook the wildfire community to its core.
Yeah.
But it also served as a wake-up call,
Okay.
leading to major changes in wildfire suppression tactics.
Mm-hmm.
You know, today firefighters receive much more extensive training, they use better equipment, and they rely on real-time weather data to make better decisions.
So we've learned some hard lessons from past tragedies.
Yeah.
But as wildfires become more frequent and intense, I imagine the challenges facing those firefighters are only going to increase.
That's right. Yeah, we're seeing longer fire seasons, drier conditions, more extreme fire behavior.
Right.
It's a new reality,
Mm-hmm.
and it demands a new approach to wildfire management.
Speaking of a new approach, we've talked about how climate change is fueling wildfires.
Yeah.
But the article also discusses how those wildfires, in turn, contribute to climate change.
Right.
It's like a vicious cycle.
Yeah, it's a classic feedback loop, you see.
Mm-hmm.
When wildfires burn, they release massive amounts of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and that traps heat,
Right.
which contributes to global warming, and that warming, in turn, creates those drier conditions that are more susceptible to wildfires.
So wildfires are both a symptom and a cause of climate change.
Exactly.
That's a pretty sobering thought.
It is. It really highlights the need for a holistic approach to tackling this problem.
Right.
You know, we need to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions to mitigate climate change,
Mm-hmm.
but we also need to improve our forest management practices and wildfire preparedness to break that feedback loop.
The article mentions that even the fire retardants we use to fight these fires can have unintended consequences for the environment.
You're right. There's always a trade-off.
Mm-hmm.
You know, fire retardants are very effective at slowing down fires,
Right.
but they can also contaminate water sources and affect soil health.
Oh, wow.
It's about finding the right balance, you know, using them strategically, not indiscriminately.
It seems like there's no easy solution when it comes to battling wildfires.
It's a complex issue, for sure.
Yeah, it makes you realize how important prevention is.
Absolutely. Prevention is always the best medicine.
Mm-hmm.
We need to be proactive in managing our forests, reducing those hazardous fuels, and just educating the public about fire safety.
The article talks about something called prescribed burns, which sounds a bit counterintuitive.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't setting fires on purpose, like, dangerous?
Well, it might seem counterintuitive, but prescribed burns are actually a valuable tool for managing wildfire risk.
Oh.
These are controlled burns, you see, carefully planned and executed to reduce fuel loads and just improve forest health.
So by intentionally setting smaller, less intense fires,
Right?
we can actually help prevent those larger, more destructive wildfires from happening down the road.
Exactly. It's like giving the forest a little bit of fire medicine to keep it healthy and resilient.
Right.
Remember how we talked about some ecosystems needing fire?
Mm-hmm.
Prescribed burns can mimic those natural fire cycles, clearing out that underbrush and allowing the fire-adapted species to thrive.
It's a reminder that fire isn't inherently bad.
Yeah,
It's all about context and management.
you've hit the nail on the head. We can't eliminate fire from the landscape entirely, and in many cases, we shouldn't.
Right.
But we can learn to manage it in a way that minimizes its negative impacts and promotes the health of our forests and communities.
So it's not about if there will be wildfires. It's about how we manage them, how we live with them,
Right.
in a way that's both sustainable and safe.
Well said. And that brings us to kind of the human side of the equation.
Right.
How do we adapt to this changing world of wildfire, both individually and as a society?
Right.
You know, how do we cope with the risks and prepare for the inevitable?
Those are big questions, and ones that we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive. Welcome back, deep divers. We're in the final stretch now of our exploration into the world of wildfires.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground, from the science behind these blazes to their impact on ecosystems and the planet as a whole.
But as we hinted at the end of part 2, there's one crucial piece of the puzzle we haven't fully explored yet: the human element.
And it's a complex piece,
Yeah.
encompassing everything from the immediate dangers faced by firefighters and residents
Mm-hmm.
to the long-term health and psychological effects that can linger long after the flames are out.
The article paints a pretty vivid picture of the health risks associated with wildfire smoke.
Yeah.
We touched on this earlier, but can you delve a bit deeper into the specific pollutants in that smoke and how they affect our bodies?
It's important to remember that wildfire smoke, it's not just smoke.
Right.
It's this toxic cocktail of gases and particulate matter. And some of those ingredients are particularly nasty. We're talking about things like fine particulate matter, or PM 2.5
Okay.
and carbon monoxide.
Those sound familiar. I think I've heard them mentioned in like air pollution warnings, even when there aren't wildfires.
Yeah, you're right. Those pollutants are harmful regardless of where they come from.
Right.
But wildfires can pump them out in just enormous quantities,
Wow.
creating this hazardous air quality for miles around.
And PM 2.5 is especially dangerous because it's so small, right?
Exactly.
Those tiny particles can actually bypass our body's natural defenses and get deep into our lungs.
Think of them like these microscopic invaders, irritating and inflaming your airways, making it hard to breathe, triggering coughing, wheezing, shortness of breath.
Right.
For people with asthma or other respiratory conditions, wildfire smoke can be a real nightmare, you know, intensifying their symptoms and leading to some serious complications.
And then there's carbon monoxide,
Right.
which is scary because you can't even see it or smell it.
Carbon monoxide is a silent killer.
Yeah.
It's a colorless, odorless gas that sneaks into your bloodstream and prevents your red blood cells from carrying oxygen throughout your body.
Wow.
At high concentrations, it can be fatal.
Yeah.
But even at lower levels, it can cause headaches, dizziness, fatigue.
The article mentioned that carbon monoxide is a particular concern for firefighters who are obviously exposed to so much smoke.
It is. They're on the front lines, breathing in that smoke day in and day out. But it's also a danger for residents near wildfires.
Right.
Especially those with health conditions that make them more vulnerable.
It's a good reminder that even if you're not directly in the path of the flames, wildfire smoke can still pose a serious threat.
It can.
And it's not just our physical health that's at risk, is it? The article also talks about the psychological impact of wildfires.
Right.
Which can be just as devastating.
It's understandable that we focus on those immediate physical dangers.
Right.
But the mental and emotional toll of these events can be profound and long-lasting. Imagine the trauma of losing your home, your belongings, everything you hold dear, in a matter of hours.
It's a lot to process.
It is. It's a loss that can shake you to your core.
Or even just the constant fear and anxiety of living in a wildfire-prone area, never knowing when the next fire might erupt. That kind of stress can really wear you down over time.
Absolutely. These experiences can be incredibly stressful.
Yeah.
And that stress can manifest in different ways, you know, anxiety, depression, insomnia, even post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD in some cases.
The article mentions that children are particularly vulnerable to these psychological impacts.
They are. Children often haven't developed those coping mechanisms that adults have.
Right.
And they might have a harder time processing the trauma and disruption caused by a wildfire.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's crucial for parents, caregivers, and communities to provide support and resources to help them navigate those difficult experiences.
We've talked a lot about the risks and impacts of wildfires, but I want to circle back to the people who dedicate their lives to fighting these infernos. Those wildland firefighters face incredible dangers, don't they?
They do. It's a profession that demands immense courage, skill, and physical stamina. Imagine battling a fire that's hotter than a furnace, surrounded by thick smoke that makes it hard to see, and knowing that the fire can change direction or intensify in an instant.
Earlier, we discussed the Man Gulch fire.
Right.
That tragedy that took the lives of 13 smoke jumpers back in 1949.
Yeah.
It's just a stark reminder of just how dangerous this work can be, even for the most experienced firefighters.
The Man Gulch fire was a turning point for wildfire management. It forced us to confront the risks, to learn from our mistakes, and to improve our tactics. Today, firefighters have more comprehensive training, better equipment, and access to real-time weather data to help them make safer decisions.
So we've come a long way. But as wildfires become more frequent and intense, the challenges facing firefighters are only going to get tougher.
That's right. We're in a new era of wildfire, and we need to adapt our strategies to meet these new challenges.
Right.
That means investing in research, developing new technologies, and perhaps most importantly, empowering communities to become more fire adapted.
What does it mean for a community to be fire adapted?
It's about shifting our mindset, you know, from simply reacting to wildfires to proactively preparing for them and learning to live with them in a way that's sustainable and safe.
Right.
Imagine communities with homes built with fire-resistant materials, surrounded by defensible space where the vegetation is carefully managed to reduce fuel loads. Think about communities with well-rehearsed evacuation plans where residents know what to do when a fire threatens. That's what fire adaptation looks like.
So it's about recognizing that wildfires are a part of our landscape, and we need to learn to coexist with them in a way that minimizes risk.
right?
And maximizes our safety and well-being.
Exactly. It's not about conquering fire.
Mm-hmm.
It's about respecting its power and learning to live with it in a way that's both responsible and resilient.
That's a powerful message and a fitting conclusion to our deep dive into the world of wildfires.
Yeah.
We've explored the science, the dangers, the resilience, and the human stories behind these incredible events.
I hope this deep dive has given you a new appreciation for the complexity of this issue.
Yeah.
And the importance of taking a proactive approach to wildfire management.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And as always, we encourage you to keep exploring, keep learning, and keep asking questions.
Yes.
The more we understand about wildfires, the better equipped we'll be to navigate this challenging and ever-changing landscape.
Stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe out there, deep divers.
Until next time. Hey there, Space Cadets. Ever tried picking up, like, a physical copy of Stephen Hawking's On the Shoulders of Giants?
Oh, yeah.
Talk about a weighty tome, and I'm not just talking about, like, the sheer page count.
Right.
Lucky for you, we're diving deep into the heart of this book, which, just so everyone's on the same page, isn't just by Stephen Hawking. It's actually a curated collection of 5 groundbreaking works by, well, giants of scientific thought.
Yeah, that's right. Copernicus, Galileo, Kepler, Newton, and Einstein. All those guys, all in one place.
Okay, but before my brain explodes from, like, the sheer brain power radiating off these names, can you tell me why these specific works are considered so groundbreaking? Like, what makes them stand out across, the history of science?
Well, the book's title, it's right there in the title, Standing on the Shoulders of Giants. Each of these scientists was building on the work of the ones who came before them, right? Pushing the boundaries of knowledge further with, like, each generation. And it all kind of starts with Nicholas Copernicus, our first giant.
Copernicus, the guy who basically plucked the Earth out of the center of the universe and put the sun in its rightful place.
You got it. But you have to imagine, back then, everyone just assumed the Earth was the center of everything. Like, that was just the accepted truth. So Copernicus comes along with his heliocentric theory, and it wasn't just a scientific discovery, it was a total revolution. People were not happy to have their whole worldview literally turned upside down.
I bet. So how does Galileo fit into all of this? Wasn't he all about telescopes and experiments?
Exactly. And his book, Two New Sciences, is like a goldmine of groundbreaking observations and ideas. For example, Galileo was fascinated by how objects fall, like literally just dropping stuff. But he was meticulous about it, carefully recording how objects of different masses actually fall at the same weight. Before Galileo, everyone just assumed, like, a heavier object would obviously fall faster, right? Seems intuitive.
Right.
But he actually proved them wrong through, like, rigorous experimentation.
Wow, that's a serious reality check. It makes you realize how much we, just take for granted about the way things work.
Absolutely. And it's Galileo's approach to this whole idea of observing, experimenting, questioning, that really paved the way for a whole new way of understanding the natural world.
So we've gone from challenging the Earth's place in the universe to literally challenging, gravity itself. It's kind of blowing my mind. Where do we even go from here?
Well, this is where it gets even more interesting, because our next giant, Johannes Kepler, takes Copernicus's whole heliocentric model and says, hold on a second, what if those planets aren't moving in perfect circles after all?
Wait, what? They don't. I was, pictured the planets orbiting in these nice, neat little circles.
Yeah, it seems logical, right? Very symmetrical, very elegant. But Kepler, using these insanely detailed observations of Mars, he was obsessed with Mars, by the way, proved that planets actually move in ellipses, kind of stretched out circle.
Okay, I'll admit, ellipses are a bit harder to draw in my head than a perfect circle. But why is this such a big deal, in the grand scheme of things?
Because it reveals something so fundamental about gravity. You see, if planets were orbiting in perfect circles, it would imply this constant gravitational pull, right? But these elliptical orbits that Kepler observed, they suggested that the force of gravity actually changes depending on a planet's distance from the sun. And that was a huge clue for our next giant, Isaac Newton.
Newton. Okay, this is the guy with the apple, gravity, the whole shebang. Talk about standing on the shoulders of giants. Newton basically built a whole observatory on top.
He certainly did. Newton took the work of Copernicus, Galileo, Kepler, all these brilliant minds, and kind of wove them together into his masterpiece, Principia Mathematica. And in that book, he gave us the laws of motion, like the very rules that govern how everything moves. And then on top of that, he gave us something even more profound, universal gravitation.
Universal gravitation. That sounds intense. Break it down for me. What does that even mean?
Essentially, Newton showed that every object in the universe, and I mean every object, from planets to pebbles, attracts every other object. And the strength of that attraction depends on two things: how massive those objects are and the distance between them. So that apple falling from the tree, it's being governed by the same force that keeps the moon in orbit around the Earth.
Whoa. Okay, I need a minute to process this. We've gone from the Earth being the center of the universe to a universe governed by, like, invisible forces that affect literally everything.
And we're not done yet, because our final giant, Albert Einstein, takes these already mind-blowing concepts and kind of flips them on their head, like literally warping our understanding of space and time itself. But, we'll save that wild ride for after a quick break.
Right. My brain is officially rebelling against, like, all the laws of physics. You said before the break that Einstein basically warped space and time. I'm kind of terrified and super intrigued all at the same time.
Yeah, it's definitely a wild ride.
Get me with it.
Okay, so Einstein's theory of relativity, this is where things get really, really trippy, right? Because, you see, Newton, he just assumed that space and time were these constants, right? Like a fixed stage where the universe just, like, did its thing.
Yeah, makes sense.
But Einstein comes along and he's like, nope, not so fast. Space and time are way more dynamic than that. They're more like, a trampoline.
A trampoline? Okay, I was not expecting that analogy.
Think about it, right? If you put, like, a bowling ball right in the middle of a trampoline, it's going to create this, like, dip. Okay, now imagine that bowling ball is the sun and the trampoline is space-time.
Okay, I'm with you.
So massive objects like stars, they actually warp the fabric of space-time around them.
Whoa. So are you saying that planets aren't just orbiting the sun because of some invisible force, but they're actually, like, following curves in space-time that are created by the sun's mass?
Exactly. It's like those planets are, like, rolling around in the dip created by that bowling ball, right? Remember the trampoline?
Right. Oh, man, my mind is, like, actually bending right now.
And it gets even wilder because Einstein also showed that gravity, it isn't just about mass, it's also about energy. Like, they're two sides of the same coin.
Okay, now that is just blowing my mind.
And that's where his famous equation comes in, EMCC3. Energy equals mass times the speed of light squared.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that one on, like, T-shirts and stuff.
Right, exactly. It's everywhere.
I'm starting to see why Einstein is considered, like, a total rock star of science,
Yeah.
But all this talk about, like, warped space-time and energy, it's incredible and all, but, like, is it actually relevant to our, daily lives?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Einstein's theories, they weren't just like theoretical musings, They actually had, and still have, practical applications that have shaped, like, our modern world in so many ways.
Really? What kind of applications? Give me an example.
Okay, well, let's take GPS, for example.
Right.
So those GPS satellites that are, like, orbiting the Earth, they rely on these incredibly precise atomic clocks to function correctly.
Okay.
But here's the thing. Because those satellites are moving at super high speeds, and they're experiencing weaker gravity than we are down here on Earth, farther away from the Earth's center time actually moves slightly slower for them.
Wait, are you serious? Like, time is actually different up there?
It's true. Now, it's obviously a tiny, tiny difference, but it's significant enough to totally mess up GPS calculations. We're talking miles off if we didn't adjust for it. And guess what we use to adjust for it? Einstein's theories.
Oh, wow. So, yeah, next time I use my phone to navigate, I'm going to have to, like, thank Einstein.
Exactly.
It's just really striking me how each of these scientists, they all built on the work of the ones who came before them. Like, it's like they were all part of this, incredible relay race of discovery, passing the baton of knowledge through the ages.
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually what's so inspiring about On the Shoulders of Giants. It's not just about these, like, brilliant minds in isolation. It's about this really beautiful collaborative nature of science. It shows how, like, each generation builds upon the foundation that was laid by the ones who came before.
And I think it's also kind of comforting in a way to know that even, like, geniuses like Newton and Einstein, they got things wrong sometimes, too. I mean, they completely revolutionized our understanding of the universe, but their work wasn't the be-all and end-all of, like, scientific knowledge.
Right, exactly. Science is never really settled. It's constantly evolving as like new discoveries are made, new technologies emerge, new perspectives come into play.
Yeah. It's like this giant puzzle, right? We were talking about that earlier. You think you've got a piece in the right place, but then, boom, some new discovery comes along and you're forced to, like, rethink the whole picture.
That's a great way to put it. And that's honestly where the real aha moments happen, right? Those moments when a new piece of information clicks into place and suddenly the whole universe just kind of snaps into focus. And I think On the Shoulders of Giants really beautifully captures that feeling of discovery, that thrill of pushing the boundaries of what we know and what we think we know about the universe.
Yeah, it's like we get to experience those aha moments right alongside these scientific giants as we're, like, delving into their work.
Absolutely. And I think that's actually what makes this book so special. It's not just some dry recounting of like scientific facts and theories and, boring stuff like that. It's actually an invitation to like actively participate in this ongoing adventure of scientific exploration.
So what you're saying is it's not just a book for scientists or, like, hardcore science enthusiasts. It's a book for anyone who's ever, looked up at the night sky and just felt that sense of awe and wonder.
Exactly. And in a way, we're all standing on the shoulders of giants, whether we realize it or not, right?
Huh.
Every time we use a smartphone or rely on GPS or benefit from literally any of the countless technologies that exist because of scientific discoveries, we're benefiting from the curiosity and the hard work of all those who came before us.
That's a really empowering thought. It reminds us that we're all part of this, like, incredible lineage of discovery, and that each of us has the potential to, contribute to this ever-growing body of human knowledge in our own way.
And who knows, right? Maybe someday someone will be having the same conversation about the scientists of today,
Right.
marveling at how they stood on the shoulders of giants and reached for these like new heights of understanding.
It's a very humbling thought, but also incredibly inspiring at the same time.
For sure.
It's true,
Yeah.
It's so easy to just get caught up in, like, the day-to-day and totally forget that we're living on this, like, this planet in a universe where space and time can, like, bend and energy can just become matter. It's wild.
It really is one of those things, that just kind of blows your mind when you actually stop and think about it.
It's both humbling and exhilarating, kind of at the same time.
Totally.
But I think that sense of wonder, that, like, that drive to unravel the mysteries of the universe, that's got to be the true legacy of these giants we've been talking about.
100%. It's about keeping that curiosity alive.
Absolutely. Speaking of legacy, we've covered, like, a ton of groundbreaking science today. I mean, we've really been through the trenches of, like, some serious physics.
Yeah, we have.
But if you had to pick one big takeaway, like the one thing you really hope listeners will walk away with after diving into On the Shoulders of Giants, what would it be?
Oh, that's a great question. I think for me, it would be this idea that, scientific progress, it's not this like straight line. It's not A to B to C.
Right.
It's messy. It's collaborative. It's full of like detours and dead ends and these like unexpected breakthroughs that come out of nowhere.
So like we were saying earlier, it really is like this giant puzzle, right?
Mhm. Exactly. And sometimes you think, okay, I've got this piece figured out. I know where it goes. But then, bam, a new discovery comes along, and suddenly you're having to rethink the whole picture.
And that's where those aha moments happen, right?
Yes.
Those times when a new piece of information just clicks into place and suddenly, boom, you're seeing the universe with, like, fresh eyes.
100%. And I think On the Shoulders of Giants, more than anything, it really captures that feeling, that sense of discovery, that thrill you get from like pushing the boundaries of human knowledge.
As when we get to experience those, like, aha moments right alongside these scientific giants,
Yeah.
just by, like, engaging with their work, their process.
Exactly. And again, that's what makes this book so special. It's not just, a textbook. It's an invitation to participate in this amazing adventure that is scientific exploration.
So to sum it up, this isn't just a book for, like, academics with PhDs in physics or even, like, science nerds like me.
Right.
It's a book for anyone who's ever looked up at the night sky and just felt that, like, that pull, that sense of awe and wonder about, like, what's out there.
100%. And, in a way, we're all standing on the shoulders of giants.
Oh, I like that.
Whether we realize it or not, right? Like every time we use a smartphone, every time we rely on our GPS to get us somewhere, anytime we benefit from literally any of the technologies that exist today because of scientific discoveries, We're indebted to these people, to their curiosity, to their hard work.
That's a really, really powerful way to think about it. And I think it's a nice reminder that we're all a part of this, like, this incredible ongoing lineage of discovery. That each of us, in our own way, has the potential to contribute to this, like, ever-growing body of human knowledge. And who knows, maybe, like, someday someone will be having this same conversation, but about the scientists of today.
Right.
About how they were the ones who stood on the shoulders of giants and, like, reached for these new heights of understanding.
That's a great point. I love that. Because it could be any of us, right?
It's a humbling thought, but it's also incredibly inspiring at the same time.
For sure.
Well, folks, I think that about wraps up our deep dive into On the Shoulders of Giants. Hopefully you've enjoyed this little journey through the cosmos with us, and hopefully you're leaving today feeling a little bit smarter and maybe a whole lot more awestruck than when we started.
Absolutely. I second that.
So remember, the universe is out there.
Yeah.
And it is full of mysteries just waiting to be unraveled. So never stop being curious. Never stop asking those big questions. Never stop exploring. And who knows, maybe you'll be the one to make the next groundbreaking discovery, the next giant.
You never know. That's the beauty of it.
And on that note, we will leave you to ponder those infinite possibilities. Happy reading, everybody.